Hello, this is MechaDre11 and welcome to part 6 of the internal combustion engine build series, where we take an old refrigeration compressor and convert it into an internal combustion engine. A working two-stroke internal combustion engine. As you saw in the last part, it was pretty darn exciting. We got this thing to run. What we did is we took a syringe with fuel in it, and we basically did manual fuel injection. The problem is that it's quite a pain to do manual fuel injection. So what we're going to be doing in this video is building a carburetor. And a carburetor's job is to meter the fuel going into the internal combustion engine. So it's basically combining a certain amount of fuel with a certain amount of air, and it keeps that ratio very constant using the Venturi principle. In this video, we're going to be building a Venturi type carburetor. What's a Venturi? Well, to understand what a Venturi is, you have to understand Bernoulli's principle. Bernoulli's principle states that as a fluid's velocity increases, its pressure decreases. So let's say you have a stream of gas that's moving at a very high velocity. Well, its pressure is going to be decreased. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way science works. So to demonstrate it, I have a glass of water here, and I have a straw. So I'm going to put this straw in the glass of water. So then I have a second straw that I'm going to be blowing into, and I'm going to hold this at a 90-degree angle to the first straw. And what's going to happen is that high velocity gas is going to be exiting the end of this tube. This one is going to be in that high velocity gas stream, and because it's in the high velocity gas stream, due to Bernoulli's principle, there is a decrease in pressure, and because there's decreased pressure compared to the air surrounding it and the air pressing down on the top of the water, atmospheric pressure will then push on the surface of the water and push the water out of the straw, and it will get dispersed as a fine mist. So here we go. Pretty cool, isn't it? Freaking science! So now that we understand how Bernoulli's principle works, let's look at the Venturi effect. So the Venturi effect is basically Bernoulli's principle except inside of a tube. So what we have is a tube here of a certain diameter. So we have a same diameter here and here. And in the middle, we have a decreased diameter. And that decreased diameter causes the fluid flowing through here, or the air, to increase in velocity. That increase in velocity decreases the pressure. So we get a vacuum, we get a decreased pressure inside of here, and we have a fuel line connected to this port here, and so the decreased pressure sucks the fuel in, just like how we saw the water get sucked up that straw. It gets sucked up and dispersed into the airstream entering the engine. And that's how a Venturi carburetor works. Alright, so I've been thinking about how to build this carburetor for quite a while now, and this is what I've come up with. So what we're going to have is some type of a block of metal, and what we're going to do is drill a small hole through it that is, let's say, this small diameter of the Venturi. And then we're going to drill another hole on each side of it that is slightly larger. Basically like that. So we have a small restriction here, and that's our Venturi. So then off the side of this, we'll have a really small hole, and that's where our hypodermic needle will be inserted into the low pressure zone of the Venturi, so our fuel will get sucked in through that small hole. Down here, we're going to have our throttle valve, and this is, by the way, where the engine will be connected. So then we'll have our throttle valve that will essentially just be a steel rod with a hole drilled in it. So we'll have a hole right in the shaft. This shaft that will go into this hole. So as you turn that shaft, it will block off kind of like a ball valve. So the metal shaft will work very much like how a ball valve works, and that's going to be our throttle valve. Alright, so I need a block of metal, because like sometimes heat sinks, you can like get heat sinks that will have like a big chunk of metal kind of like what I used for the head of the engine. Oh, here we go. That's what I'm looking for. So these were from old UPSs, I think. Oh, here's another one. Here's the board that these actually came off of, so you can see that the computer UPS had these mounted on there, and they were heat sinks. And similar to this one here, where it's just a big block of metal. And this would probably work as well, but we're going to use these because I already have them off the board, and they're nice and convenient size. So now I need a shaft that's going to fit one of these drill bits, because that's going to be our valve. I think most of these are metric too, which is kind of a problem as well. But these are all from printers. Too big. Ooh, this one feels about right. Oh, that's about right. Okay, so now we have, what is this, 9/30 seconds? Yeah, 9/30 seconds. I think that'll work. First, let's drill a 3/16 inch hole in this metal shaft that is going to be our throttle valve. I think that should work just fine. Let's start by drilling a hole this way through the block, and we're going to use our 1/8 inch drill bit, and that's going to be the smallest diameter of our Venturi. So let's get the center of this approximately. Now let's put a 9/30 seconds hole right here, and that's actually in right the right spot, and this is going to be for our throttle valve. Here's what we got so far. We already drilled all the way through with a 1/8 inch drill bit, and that's the smallest diameter of our Venturi tube. Secondly, what we're going to do is we're going to drill about this far down with the 3/16 inch drill bit, as well as from this side, but we're going to stop and leave this section 1/8 inch. So this is going to be a smaller section, and that will be where our Venturi effect happens. So now let's drill the 3/16 inch hole to about there. That should be just about right. Now let's drill from the other side. So now what we can do is we can use my homemade depth gauge that I made a while ago. Put that down in there till we hit the restricted section where the Venturi is. And we can scribe a line here with it. And that's the other side. So now let's drill our hole right about here somewhere. So it's going to intersect the Venturi tube. And I'm using a 1/16 inch drill bit. Now our fuel jet will just go right down in there like that. Alright, so our carburetor is pretty much done. So you can see it's a nice block of aluminum with a bunch of holes in it. So you can see the main throttle throat going through here, and then we have our restriction in there, which is our Venturi. And so then down here we have our shaft goes in there with basically our throttle valve. And as you can see, you can shut that off or adjust the throttle, so just how much air is going into the engine. And then up here we have another tiny hole, and that's where our fuel injector will go, or our jet, as you probably would call it, is a jet. So we're going to want that to only protrude slightly into the airstream. You don't want it flush with the wall of the Venturi. You want it to stick slightly in so that the droplets of fuel get dispersed by the high velocity air instead of just running down the sides of the carburetor. You want them to get dispersed right into the airstream. Now there's several things that we could use for the jet. This is a needle that I bought on Amazon for a few dollars, and it came with a kit like this of a bunch of different sizes, and these are actually for dispensing glue and things like that. They're not for medical purposes, but you couldn't use a medical needle, I suppose. Just be careful. Likewise, this mechanical pencil might work as well. It's a 0.5 millimeter mechanical pencil, and as you can see, it has a very small opening, almost the same size as this needle. So I think this would work very well as well. And I think that's actually what I'm going to use. Basketball bicycle pump filling nozzle. So you can see it has a fairly small opening. This one here has an even smaller opening. So this might work as well. Alright, so let's figure out how to mount the carburetor on the engine just for a quick test. So as you remember from the last video, this is our intake port. So what I'm thinking we could do is make this whole thing the intake. First what we need to do is plug up all of these holes, because there's a bunch of holes over here, there's holes over here, there's a hole here. So first we have to plug those up so that they don't leak. And I'm going to plug those up with JB Weld at some point, once we make sure this works. So I'm going to put a cork gasket on there that I made. Have a wash that's the right size. And then here's another gasket that will go on there. And then we can pretty much just mount this, the carburetor, right there, lining everything up. And if we apply pressure to that, it should seal just fine. So what I've done is I've created a little bracket here out of some sheet metal from an old monitor. And then I've got a long bolt here with a nut on it. And I can stick that in here. And then we need to line the carburetor up so that it doesn't get blocked. And then we can tighten this guy down. And I think that should work just fine. So what we can do is insert our throttle valve in here. Let's put a binder clip here so that we can kind of keep track of where the throttle valve needs to be in order to be open and closed. You should be able to see the throttle valve opening and closing in there. So I think that'll work. So let's mount up the engine and give it a quick test and see if it works. I think we have everything wired up for a test. So we have our ignition hooked up, we have our fuel supply, we have the jet going into the carburetor. And what's going to be pretty cool is the vacuum created by the Venturi should actually suck the fuel out of here, even though it's about an inch lower than the level of the jet. And that's because of the Venturi effect and Bernoulli's principle. So when I give this a good pull, you should actually see the fuel get sucked up, hopefully. We'll see what happens. Hey, look at that. So now the fuel's only going to get to about that level because, well, I mean, the fuel jar is not higher than the injector. Look at that. The fuel is already into the carburetor. Let's give it another priming pull, and then we'll turn on the ignition and see if we can get it start. Alright, let's turn on the ignition and see if it will start. Hey, it tried. Alright, so I've just put my valve in line. So it just died, probably because it doesn't have any fuel. Actually, what we could do is just lift up the fuel bottle to get it primed, get a bit of fuel into the system, and now we should be good. After a bit of adjustment, oh my gosh, it's working so good! Okay, that's idle. Check it out! Idle? Oh my gosh, it's working so good right now. I've ever gone it to idle. Oh my god. Oh my. That was scary. That was awesome. Woo! Always be knowing. Here's all 61 pieces of the internal combustion engine all laid out in a fairly orderly fashion. So as you can see, over here we'll start with the carburetor. So you've got all the pins to hold the throttle valve in. And we've got the throttle body and the different plates and things to hold it on, the seal. because it goes right in here. And then we've got the bolts to hold on the fuel jet. Then we've got our head gasket, our head bolts, spark plug. We've got the piston, I guess that'd be the knuckle pin. Here's the connecting rod bolts. We've got the seal and the cap for the crankcase cover bolts. This little clamp holds on the carburetor, and that's pretty much it, and the flywheel. So, yeah. So now let's assemble it. Well guys, it is finished, officially. The engine part is finished. So we have the carburetor, we have everything, the ports, everything is finished. Now, all we gotta do is a nice test, and I am stoked for this test. It is gonna be awesome. So really after this, I mean the engine portion is finished. All we have to do is the ignition. I've got a nice little needle valve that I've JB welded some copper tubes onto. So kind of like how there's a full speed and a low speed jet on a carburetor, that's what this is going to be for, but we only really have a high speed jet. And it dies. Alright, so check it out. It is finished. The compressor to internal combustion engine conversion is a success, definitely. I mean, look at it. It just looks like some kind of awesome engine kind of thing. It's like awesome, awesome, awesome. And got a nice oak board to mount it on. It just looks super awesome and super cool. And I'm very happy with how it turned out. I hope you guys like it. And I hope to see some of you guys build some similar to this using scraps and minimal tools. That's kind of my idea for this project, is to expand the amount of people that could possibly build an internal combustion engine. because just pointing out how simple it is. I mean, why it took me, by the way, I'm really sorry that it took me so long to get this video out. That was because I was helping out my grandma because she was in the hospital. She's good. She's fine now. But yeah, so that's the main reason why I didn't get a video out for 4 weeks there. I'm really sorry about that, guys. But next part is part 7, and we're going to be working on some ignition for this guy. So right now we were just using the neon sign transformer, constant arc ignition, and it does work pretty good, but sometimes it backfires and things like that. So I'm hoping to get a proper ignition on this, and I'm going to be going over several different ones. I'm going to be using scrap parts, I'm going to be buying some parts, I'm going to be using Hall effect sensor. So there's going to be several different options you can go with. Some are going to be cheap, some are expensive, some are simple, complicated. So yeah, so basically stay tuned for that video. It'll be coming in a few weeks. And as always, thanks for watching, and keep experimenting.